order. You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man.
An inspection of police forces in England and Wales has revealed that more than 300 officers and staff have been accused over a 2-year period of using their position to sexually exploit people, including victims of crime. The Inspectorate of Constabulary said the abuse of authority for sexual advantage was now the most serious form of corruption facing the police service. Our Home Affairs correspondent Danny Shaw has more.
PC Stephen Mitchell, jailed in 2011 for raping and indecently assaulting vulnerable women he met while on duty in Newcastle. The case caused alarm, but a report has found since then hundreds of other police officers have been accused of abusing their power to sexually exploit people. And the vulnerability of the victims is what makes this type of corruption so serious.
You might have women who officers encounter as victims of domestic abuse or victims of other sexual offences. There might be women that police officers have arrested in the course of their duties. There might be, in a few cases, vulnerable underage girls. So the common factor, if you like, is a relationship of power that the officer abuses. They are there as the guardian and they become an abuser.
In the 2 years to the end of March, 334 police officers and staff were accused of sexual offences. There were 436 separate allegations. But the watchdog found fewer than half, 48%, were referred to the Independent Police Complaints Commission. Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary says all previous allegations should now be reviewed and considered for referral. The report was commissioned by Theresa May when she was Home Secretary. It acknowledges that most officers and staff work with integrity and honesty, but warns that some police forces are still failing to recognise the alleged abuse as a serious form of corruption. The National Police Chiefs Council agrees that police must be more proactive in rooting out such behaviour and says it is developing a national strategy to help all forces to do so. Ben Bland, BBC News.
Let's talk to our Home Affairs correspondent Danny Shaw. So the most significant issue in terms of police corruption facing the service in England and Wales?
Yes, I suppose most of us would have a view of corruption as something that involves money, brown envelopes, bribing people and so on. But actually, this is a form of corruption because the police officers are abusing their position, their status, their power, and they're undermining trust in the police service. And they're using it in this way to sexually exploit people in a way that has a terrible effect, a devastating effect on victims and a corrosive effect on public confidence in policing. Now, how big is the issue? You've seen the figures in that report. We don't know whether that figure has gone up or down in recent years. The suggestion is that it's underreported, the problem. And there's also a concern about what happens to police officers when they're accused of these offences. As we saw in the report, fewer than half of cases are referred to the Independent Police Complaints Commission, and over a 1-year period there was something like 60 to 70 officers who left the service as a result of allegations concerning sexual conduct. So it looks like there are many who perhaps aren't being dealt with through the disciplinary system. What you have to remember, though, is that in some cases suspects will make allegations against police because they want to get off the charges or because they're facing very serious consequences. So some of the allegations undoubtedly may be false, and I think we have to bear that in mind as well.
Thank you very much, Danny. Danny Shaw is our Home Affairs correspondent. Sexual exploitation by police officers is the most serious corruption issue facing the service, according to the police watchdog, Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary. An inspection of police forces in England and Wales has revealed that more than 300 officers and staff have been accused over a 2-year period of using their position to sexually exploit people, including victims of crime. Inspector Mike Cunningham led the review and says it's likely that the problem is more serious than the numbers show.
The indications are, and we received information from forces that told us over a 2-year period there were 436 allegations of such behaviour. But that is potentially the tip of the iceberg. Because the recording of these matters is not consistent, we believe that is not an accurate picture. And what we're saying is at the heart of our report, which is generally positive actually about policing and how they build the trust and confidence of communities, at the heart of this issue, at the heart of our report, is this corrosive issue of officers abusing their authority to exploit vulnerable women.
Well, the National Police Chiefs Council lead for counter-corruption is Chief Constable Stephen Watson. Does he agree it's the most significant corruption challenge facing the police?
I think it is. We do confront, of course, a number of corrupting influences, but I think the quality of this sort of behaviour is so reprehensible and constitutes such a betrayal of what we stand for that it's quite right to describe it as the most serious form of corruption that we face. We treat it as serious corruption, and that is the spirit with which we approach the problem.
According to HMIC, the police watchdog, some forces are still failing to recognise it as corruption.
I certainly accept that too many inconsistencies remain between forces. In fairness, I do think that HMIC are recognising that much progress has been made, and there are a number of pockets of really good practice across the country in terms of both our approach proactively to targeting and pursuing offenders, and I use the word offender quite deliberately, as well as preventing this sort of behaviour. But where HMIC fairly make recommendations, which we absolutely accept, is that there are too many inconsistencies between forces. There are...
Especially when this was flagged 4 years ago and HMIC say not enough has been done.
In fairness, I don't think HMIC are saying nothing has been done.
No,
I think
not enough has been done, I said.
Yes, and in respect of that, I absolutely accept it, as does the service, which is why we are urgently pursuing a piece of work which is to capture those elements of good practice that occur in many local police forces, as is evidenced within HMIC's report, and binding all of that best practice into one place, so that the whole service operates to the standard of the best.
I want to talk to you about good practice, and I'd like to give you some examples, all from this year, from the College of Policing website. Yes. Wiltshire Police Constable, sexual relationship with a vulnerable female witness. A Met Police Constable convicted of voyeurism. A Devon and Cornwall Police Constable engaged in sexual relations with women he met in the course of his duties. A West Mercia Constable contacted vulnerable female victims and engaged in texts of a sexual nature. Thames Valley Police Constable. This officer abused his position as a police officer in that he researched police systems to obtain personal data for a woman in order to identify her place of work and other details. He then went to her place of work whilst on duty, purporting to be there for a policing purpose, gaining further personal information about her. I mean, good practice is... I don't understand how it's not obvious to every single employee of police forces in England and Wales that that's clearly an abuse of trust.
It is absolutely clearly abuse of trust, and those examples that you give are absolutely reprehensible. But what I would say, there is no good news in this, but there are some crumbs of comfort to be obtained by the fact that the College of Policing will tell you, if you look at their disapproval register, that over 75% of all of these cases have come through internal reporting and internal intelligence development.
Well, I don't know how that is a consolation to any of the victims.
It isn't a consolation to the victims because these things should be prevented in the first instance. I absolutely accept that. But the point I'm making is that this isn't something that the service is approaching in a passive way. Those individuals, rightly brought to book and thrown out of the service, are being brought to book in the main because officers and staff in the police service are as appalled as anyone by this sort of practice. And I reiterate the point. This is reprehensible behaviour, and it comprises an absolute betrayal of the public, and we will not stand for it. But we do recognise and absolutely accept HMIC's recommendations that too much inconsistency continues to persist between forces.
What I don't understand, Chief Constable Watson, and I wonder if you can help me here, is how a trained police officer cannot see that that kind of behaviour is unethical and immoral. I mean, we're talking about grooming, stalking, abuse of people the police is supposed to be helping.
I don't think, with respect, Victoria, that there's any suggestion that any of those officers conducting themselves in that way necessarily thought that they weren't doing anything wrong. I mean, let's be clear, these people are offenders and they are behaving in an unacceptable way. The fact of the matter is, it's those who brought them to book who are the people who did see that this was unforgivable behaviour. Unfortunately, like any other walk of life, we do have individuals within the police service who will behave in this way, and we need to target them, and we need to root them out, and we need to kick them out of the service. And that is precisely what we have been doing and what we intend to do. And this is where we do welcome HMIC's recommendations, because clearly we have more to do.
Chief Constable Stephen Watson. Let's talk now to Claire Phillipson from the domestic abuse charity Wearside Women in Need. She's had to make complaints to the police about inappropriate conduct of officers before, but says the situation is getting better now. Also here, Laura Watson, who speaks for the English Collective of Prostitutes, a campaign group which supports sex workers. She says police officers using their status for sex is a big problem. Give us some examples.
Well, we're seeing it in relation to sex workers, but also we work with women against rape, and we're seeing it across the board. So many different sectors of women: sex workers, women of colour, migrant women, drug users, and in this report as well, it shows actually rape and domestic violence survivors are being targeted as well, which we've experienced in our group. But what we are seeing is a number of things, from police using databases to stalk and harass and target sex workers, going to their home addresses, that kind of thing, but also demanding free sex and even rape in some cases. So it's very serious charges, and we're seeing it increasingly.
Claire Phillipson, what do you think of these figures?
I mean, obviously they're deeply concerning, and they will be the tip of the iceberg. And I think we need to reflect and have a wider analysis of this, in that clearly police officers are recruited from the general population. The general population has endemic sexism, has attitudes to women about their role and function in society. And the police are massively gendered. You know, we're moving towards a position slowly where up and down the country you've got maybe 25-35% of police forces are female. So you still have very, very masculine cultures. And where you have those kind of masculine cultures, then that will spread out into attitudes and behaviours towards women.
What kind of examples, sorry to interrupt Claire, what kind of examples could you give our audience, obviously without naming names, that where you've had to go to the police to complain on behalf of women about totally inappropriate behaviour?
I mean, I would have to emphasise first that this is very much in the past, and things are changing, and that we're potentially lucky in that we're in an area of high-performing police forces in the North East. But in the past, certainly, we've dealt with officers who were tasked specifically to visit victims of domestic violence, who were clearly very vulnerable, in a very emotionally fragile state after years of abuse. And along came a man with power in a uniform who acted the saviour, the white knight, but who was using it as an opportunity to have multiple sexual relationships with women. That's clearly a gross misuse of power. It might not be criminal, it might not be prosecutable, but on every level it is wrong.
Laura Watson, is there some link, do you think, or do you have... is part of your view that because people have a particular view of prostitutes, rightly or wrongly, actually that gives more protection to police officers to treat sex workers in any way they want?
Yes, that's exactly why we think police target sex workers in particular, or many different sectors, because being part of a vulnerable group, for example. So we know that police have said in court cases, for example, that they thought that the sex workers wouldn't complain because of their lifestyle. We know that they target people in particular because you know, they think that the women won't be believed for whatever reason, and we know that that's definitely the case. I mean, in the particular situation of sex workers is that you are an illegal worker, and therefore the police always have the power of arrest over you, and even if you do complain, they always have the power to say, okay, well, we're going to investigate you and prosecute you for prostitution offences, which obviously we think that if the police are in a position where they do have a lot of power and discretion over women in that situation, that actually they clearly can't be trusted, and therefore that builds our case for the abolition of the prostitution laws, really.
Do you think the numbers are actually quite small in relation to, I mean, there are 200,000 police officers and staff working in forces in England and Wales. We're talking about over 300 here.
Well, we think there's a number of things. Also, women's situation is getting worse, and impoverishment means that women are increasingly more vulnerable. So we don't think that it's something that's going to stop. We think that it's it's increasing. We've also been gathering information from our network all over the country, and we have 4 recent examples where police officers have targeted sex workers in particular via police databases, stalking and harassing, and one case was a voyeurism case. So we know that it's still ongoing, and we don't think that it's a small problem. The problem is that it's not getting dealt with, and that's why it's ongoing, is that the police think that they can get away with it.
That's not fair. There are some officers who are brought to justice. They are tried, they appear in court, they are punished. Some officers are allowed to retire, in inverted commas, without any action being taken against them.
Yes, we know of examples where there is a growing movement of sex workers who are saying, no, that's it, we don't want this anymore. And some of the examples that we know from our network are where sex workers have said, no, that's it, we are taking you to court, and there have been convictions. But we also know that in many, many cases, it's dealt with like it's some kind of internal corruption issue, when in fact it should be dealt with as a criminal issue, and there should be prosecutions increasingly.
Okay. Thank you both very much. Claire Phillipson, thank you very much, and Laura Watson, thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.
And if you tolerate this, then your children will be next. And if you tolerate this, then your children